The night everything changed, I was wearing my good earrings. That detail still gets me. I had stood in front of my bathroom mirror for 10 minutes, choosing between the gold studs Daniel gave me for Mother's Day 8 years ago and the pearl drops I'd bought myself after I retired. I chose the pearls because I wanted to look nice. I wanted her to be proud to introduce me. I want you to hold on to that image, a 64-year-old woman in her bathroom in Tempe, Arizona, worrying about her earrings, completely unaware that in 3 hours she would be standing on a manicured lawn in Scottsdale with a champagne flute in her hand and 30 strangers watching her world split cleanly in two. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you who I am first, because this story only makes sense if you understand where I started. My name is Maggie Calloway. I spent 31 years as a school librarian at Rover Elementary in Tempe, the kind of job where you learn, very quickly, how to read people. Children can't hide what they feel. Neither, I eventually learned, can adults. They just think they can. I raised Daniel alone from the time he was 11, after his father's heart decided it was done one April afternoon on the I-10. I worked full-time, kept the house, drove to every single cross-country meet, and when Daniel was 29 and sitting in a hospital bed at Banner University Medical Center with a diagnosis that turned my legs to water, I was there. Every treatment, every bad night, every morning he couldn't get up, I got up for both of us. I tell you that not for sympathy. I tell you because it matters later. Everything I'm about to tell you matters later. Daniel met Brittany at an open house. She was the agent. He was looking at a place he couldn't quite afford. He called me that same evening, voice lighter than it had been in years. "She's different, Mom. She's sharp." I remember thinking, good. He deserved sharp. He deserved someone who matched him. I tried with Brittany. I want that on record. I brought food to their house when they first moved in together. She thanked me, and I later found the casserole dish in the trash still half full, which I told myself meant nothing. I planned my holiday visits around her schedule. I asked about her work. I listened to 45-minute conversations about the Scottsdale real estate market and nodded like it was the most fascinating thing I'd ever heard. When Daniel asked me to co-sign the business loan 3 years ago, $180,000 so Brittany could launch her own brokerage instead of splitting commissions with her old firm, I signed. I signed because he asked me to, because he was my son, because I still had enough equity in the Tempe house that the bank would approve it, and because it never once occurred to me that a signature on a piece of paper could eventually be used as a weapon. That's your first mistake, Maggie, I think now. You never imagined weapons. If you're new here and you stay for stories like this, where ordinary women get pushed too far and finally push back, I'd love for you to subscribe. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I always love knowing who's out there. Now let me keep going, because it gets so much worse before it gets better. The brokerage did well. Brittany is good at what she does. I'll give her that honestly. By the second year, she had 6 agents under her and a downtown Scottsdale office with her name on the door in brushed gold lettering. And somewhere in that second year, I started getting less of my son. It was gradual, the kind of thing you rationalize until you can't anymore. Thanksgiving became just them and her parents. Christmas Eve, which Daniel and I had shared every single year of his life, became a party I was invited to for 2 hours on Christmas afternoon. I was introduced to Brittany's colleagues as Daniel's mom, never by name, always by relationship, always positioned slightly behind her like a piece of furniture that came with the house. And then there were Caden and Lily. Daniel's kids from his brief first marriage were 5 and 3 when he and Brittany got together. Their mother, Jenna, had moved to Flagstaff and agreed to a custody arrangement that left Daniel, and by extension me, as their primary family in Phoenix. I had picked those children up from school. I had sat in the pediatric urgent care at midnight with Caden's ear infection. I had taught Lily to make biscuits. When Brittany's control over the calendar tightened, my Sunday afternoon calls with them started getting missed. They're at a birthday party, they're tired, maybe next week. For 4 months, I told myself I was being sensitive. I told myself blended families were complicated and I should give her grace. I wore my pearl earrings to her birthday party and I told myself, tonight, be warm, tonight, try again. The venue was a place called The Orchard in North Scottsdale, the kind of space where everything is white and gold and the floral arrangements cost more than my car payment. Brittany was in a silk dress the color of champagne, hair done, laughing with a group of women I didn't recognize. I found Daniel by the bar. He hugged me a little too quickly, the way you hug someone you're slightly nervous about. You look nice, Mom. He handed me a glass and moved toward a colleague before I could answer. I stood near the windows with my champagne and watched the room. I was good at watching rooms. 31 years of librarian instinct. That's when I heard it. Brittany was maybe 15 feet away, her back half turned to me, surrounded by 3 women. I wasn't trying to listen. I was just standing there with my pearls and my champagne being invisible the way I'd apparently agreed to be. She just kind of shows up to things, Brittany was saying. Her voice was warm, inclusive, performing for her audience. She's not really, she's not even family really. She's Daniel's mom from before. You know how it is. One of the women glanced toward me, just briefly, then looked away. The room didn't stop moving. The music kept playing. Someone laughed at something across the venue. I stood very still and felt something happen in my chest that I don't have an exact word for. Not quite pain. More like something quietly going cold. Then I picked up my glass, crossed the room, and stopped in front of her. Brittany turned. Her smile stayed in place. Practiced. Perfect. I raised my champagne toward her. Perfect, I said. Then don't ask me for money. The smile didn't disappear all at once. It drained, like someone had pulled a plug somewhere underneath it. I set my glass on the nearest table, picked up my purse, and walked out through the white doors into the October night, where the Phoenix air still held the last warmth of summer, and my car was parked at the far end of the lot. I drove home on the 101 doing exactly the speed limit. I did not cry. I did not turn on the radio. I kept thinking about that loan, about the documents in my fireproof box at home, about the signature I'd written in blue ink 3 years ago without reading every page. What exactly did I sign? I didn't know yet that the answer to that question would eventually take everything Brittany had built and hand me back something she never even knew I had. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was crying. I'd done that in the shower, where no one could hear it, which is where women like me have always done that kind of thing. By the time I was in my pajamas with the ceiling fan turning slow overhead, the crying was finished. What replaced it was worse. It was the kind of quiet that feels like something listening. I lay there and I thought about 30 people watching Brittany's smile drain out of her face. I thought about Daniel by the bar with his too quick hug. I thought about Lily's voice on the phone the last time we'd actually connected, Grandma Maggie, I lost another tooth, and how that was 6 weeks ago and I hadn't heard from her since. You let this happen gradually, I thought. You kept giving grace until there was nothing left of you to give. Around 3 in the morning, I got up, went to the kitchen, and made coffee I didn't drink. Then I went to the hall closet and pulled out the fireproof box. It's a gray metal thing, the kind you buy at Home Depot for $40, with a combination lock I've had to reset twice because I keep forgetting the numbers. Inside, my will, the deed to the house, Daniel's birth certificate, his father's death certificate, my retirement paperwork, and at the bottom, in a manila envelope I hadn't opened in 3 years, the business loan documents. I sat down at my kitchen table at 3 a.m. in Tempe, Arizona, put on my reading glasses, the good pair, not the ones I leave in the car, and I started reading. Every page, every line, every paragraph I had trusted without examining 3 years ago because my son had asked me to, and he was my son, and that had always been enough. By the time the sky outside started going pale, I had found 2 things that made me sit back in my chair and stare at the wall for a long time. The first was my own signature, there in blue ink on page 7, cosigner, financial stakeholder. I'd known about that. What I hadn't fully understood was the language around it. The specific, careful language that described my role not just as a guarantor, but as a party with documented financial interest in the business's assets. Brittany wanted me legally removed from this loan, but you can't remove a financial stakeholder without their agreement, and I hadn't agreed to anything. The second thing I found wasn't in the loan documents at all. It was in a separate envelope I'd forgotten was even in the box. Smaller, cream-colored, with a hospital logo in the upper left corner. Banner University Medical Center. Dated 7 years ago. Inside was a piece of paper in Daniel's handwriting. Shaky handwriting, chemo handwriting, but his. A promissory note. Informal, but witnessed. He'd written it himself at my insistence during his second round of treatment, when I'd paid off $67,000 in medical debt and kept his landscaping business alive so he'd have something to come back to. I acknowledge the debt I owe my mother, Margaret Ann Calloway, in the amount of $67,000, to be repaid at such time as I am financially able. Witnessed by a nurse named Patricia Odom, RN, with her license number written neatly beside her signature, because she was that kind of thorough. I had never called that debt in, not once, not even when things got tight for me, because he was my son. I sat there looking at both documents and I felt something shift in the room, like pressure equalizing. She thinks she has all the power, I thought. She doesn't know what's in this box. I waited a week before I called a lawyer. Not because I was hesitant, because I was learning to be deliberate. I'd spent 64 years being reactive, being warm, being the person who showed up and absorbed whatever was handed to her. I was done absorbing. I found Sandra Park through the State Bar of Arizona's referral service, family law and contract litigation, 15 years in Tempe, reviews that used the words precise and unshakable more than once. Her office was on Mill Avenue, 3rd floor, with a view of the dry Salt River bed and the kind of no-nonsense furniture that told you she wasn't billing you for her decorating choices. She read both documents without speaking. I watched her face the way I used to watch kids reading a book they didn't expect to like. That moment when their expression changes without them meaning it to. She looked up over her reading glasses. Mrs. Calloway. A pause? Did anyone explain to you at closing what cosigner standing actually means under Arizona contract law? Apparently not well enough. She set the papers down carefully, the way you set something down when you don't want to appear too interested. Demanding repayment from a cosigner while the business continues to benefit from their signature and documented financial contribution is, legally speaking, a position I would not want to be arguing from the other side. I folded my hands in my lap. What about the promissory note? She looked at it again. If this holds, and I believe it does, you have a documented, witnessed financial claim against your son personally, separate from the business entirely. She paused. You've never pursued it? He's my son. She nodded slowly, like that answer told her everything she needed to know about both of us. I drove home with the windows down. October in Phoenix is the exhale the whole year builds toward. 80 degrees, the light going golden by 4 o'clock, the bougainvillea still rioting pink and orange along every stucco wall. I noticed all of it in a way I hadn't in weeks. Something is coming, I thought. I don't know exactly what shape it takes yet, but something is coming. What I didn't know was that while I was sitting in Sandra's office on Mill Avenue, Brittany was making her first serious mistake. A notary arrived at my door on a Tuesday morning. Young woman, professional, slightly apologetic in the way people are when they've been told the person they're visiting might be difficult. She had a folder of documents, a legal restructuring of the loan agreement, designed to formally remove my name as cosigner and transfer all liability to the business entity alone. Brittany had drawn it up without consulting me first. She had simply assumed I would sign, because why wouldn't I? She'd humiliated me in front of 30 people and I'd driven home quietly in the night. She had concluded I was finished. I offered the notary coffee. She declined politely. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd read those loan documents at 3 in the morning, and I went through every page. She waited. I could feel her trying not to shift in her seat. On page 4, I found a clause that would have waived any financial claims I held against the business in exchange for my removal from the loan. There it is. I set the papers down. I looked at the notary, who had done absolutely nothing wrong. Tell whoever sent you that I need more time to review. That evening, I forwarded the documents to Sandra. Her response came at 11 p.m. 2 sentences. Do not sign this. Call me tomorrow. I should have felt afraid. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. I felt patient, and patience, I was learning, is the most dangerous thing a woman like me can develop, because while I was getting patient, something else was quietly happening across Scottsdale that I didn't know about yet. A woman named Terry Walsh, whose name appeared on page 11 of the original loan documents as a silent investment partner, was opening her own financial records and not liking what she found. I didn't know Terry Walsh existed yet, but she was about to find me. I don't know what you would have done if you'd been sitting at that kitchen table at 3 in the morning with those documents in front of you. Maybe you'd have let it go. Maybe you already know, in your bones, why I couldn't. I got the call on a Thursday afternoon. Unknown number, Phoenix area code. The voice was measured, businesslike, but with something careful underneath it. The voice of someone who has decided to do something and is still convincing themselves it's the right choice. Mrs. Calloway, my name is Terry Walsh. I believe we have a mutual interest in a certain business arrangement, and I think we should have coffee. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone. She's the silent partner. Sandra had told me when I'd asked about the name on page 11. She put in $40,000 18 months ago. I've been wondering when she'd surface. When are you free? I asked. How's tomorrow? I looked out my kitchen window at the fig tree in my backyard. 12 years old, never produced a single fruit, stubbornly alive regardless. Tomorrow works fine, I said. And then I went to find a pen, because something told me I was going to want to write things down. Terry Walsh was not what I expected. I don't know exactly what I had pictured on the drive to Chandler. Someone sharper, maybe, more aggressive, the kind of woman who leads with her credentials. Instead, I found someone who looked a little like me, mid-60s, sensible shoes, a coffee already in front of her when I arrived, reading glasses pushed up on her head like she'd forgotten they were there. She stood when she saw me. We shook hands the way women do when they're sizing each other up honestly and both know it. I almost didn't call, she said, once we'd settled in. What made you? She wrapped both hands around her cup. I've been watching the accounts for 4 months. I kept telling myself there was an explanation. She paused. There isn't. She slid a folder across the table. Not thick, maybe 12 pages, but she'd tabbed the relevant sections with Post-it notes in 3 colors, which told me she was organized and had been sitting with this for a while. I put my glasses on and looked. Business expenses that weren't business expenses, a staging consultation for $8,400 at an address that turned out to be Brittany and Daniel's own home. A marketing retreat in Sedona, 4 nights, 2 people, charged to the brokerage account. Over a weekend I happened to remember because Caden had called me from his dad's phone, confused about where his stepmom was. A pattern of personal spending, modest enough in any single month to rationalize, consistent enough across 14 months to form a very clear picture. Partially funded by a loan I had guaranteed. I closed the folder. I looked out the window at the Chandler parking lot, at the ordinary Tuesday afternoon moving around us, and I thought, she didn't just dismiss me, she's been stealing from me. What do you want? I asked Terry. Out, she said simply. Clean. I put in $40,000 and I want it back, and I want my name off everything before this gets worse. She met my eyes. But I can't file anything without triggering a full audit, and a full audit means your name comes up too, and I didn't think it was right to do that without talking to you first. I sat with that for a moment. A stranger had extended me more consideration than my own daughter-in-law had in 3 years. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. We talked for 2 hours. By the time we walked out into the November Chandler sunshine, we hadn't made any dramatic agreements or shaken hands on any schemes. We had simply shared information, 2 women who had both trusted the wrong person, comparing notes. But I drove home with Terry's folder on my passenger seat and something quietly assembling itself in my mind. Not anger anymore, something more architectural than anger, a plan. Sandra and I met the following Monday. I put Terry's folder on her desk alongside my own documents. I watched Sandra work through them in her methodical way, making occasional small marks in the margins with a mechanical pencil. The office was quiet except for the traffic sounds from Mill Avenue below and the distant complaint of a leaf blower somewhere on the street. Finally, she set her pencil down. "Okay," she said, "here's what I see." She walked me through it piece by piece, the way you explain something to someone you respect enough not to simplify. My cosigner standing. The promissory note. Terry's documentation of the misallocated funds. The restructuring documents Brittany had sent, the ones designed to make me disappear from the picture cleanly before anyone looked too closely. They moved first, Sandra said. That was their mistake. The moment they sent that notary to your door, they created a paper trail of intent. What do we do with all of it? She leaned back in her chair. We don't do anything with it yet. First, we file for grandparent visitation. I hadn't expected that to be first. I must have shown it. Think about it, Sandra said. Visitation filing is a matter of public record. It tells them you're engaged, you have counsel, and you're not going away. It also immediately requires them to respond legally, which means they have to spend money and reveal their hand. Quote. She paused. And frankly, Mrs. Calloway, I think you want those children back. Let's start there. Yes, I thought. Let's start there. Brittany was showing a 4-bedroom in Paradise Valley when the process server found her. I know this because a woman named Donna, a former colleague of Ruth's, someone I had never met, happened to be the buyer's agent on the same property that day. She texted Ruth that evening, "Your friend's daughter-in-law just got served papers in front of my clients." She went completely white. It was something. Ruth called me immediately, barely containing herself. I thanked her, hung up, and allowed myself exactly 30 seconds of quiet satisfaction before moving on. Daniel called that night. I was ready for it. "Mom?" His voice was tight, controlled, the voice of a man who has been told what to say. "This is unnecessary. If you wanted to see the kids, you could have just asked." "I did ask, Daniel. For 4 months." Silence. "Brittany says you're trying to make this into something it isn't. I filed for visitation with my grandchildren because I haven't been allowed to speak to them in weeks." "That's what it is." Another silence. Longer. "She's upset," he said finally. "I imagine she is," I said. "Good night, Daniel." I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a moment, listening to the house. Then I put the kettle on. He's not angry, I thought. He's scared. Those are different things. And scared means he's starting to see something he doesn't want to see. Sandra sent the formal response to the repayment demand on a Wednesday. 12 pages of precise, unemotional legal language that I read 3 times because I wanted to understand every word. It outlined my standing as a co-signer, documented the history of financial support, including the promissory note, and noted that any litigation against me would require full business financial disclosure through discovery. The response from Brittany's attorney took 11 days. 11 days of silence in which, I later learned, Brittany fired her first lawyer and hired a second one, then spent a long weekend in Scottsdale, not answering Daniel's questions about the business accounts. The second attorney's response was 3 paragraphs, vague, non-committal, suggesting both parties might benefit from a period of reflection. Sandra called me after she read it. She sounded almost cheerful, which for Sandra was the equivalent of anyone else doing a small victory dance. "They blinked," she said. Terry filed her formal separation from the brokerage in early December. It was a clean, legal exit, the kind that, on its own, might have passed without much attention. But it triggered an automatic review by the brokerage's lender, which triggered a request for financial documentation, which landed on the desk of a compliance officer who had questions about 14 months of expense categorization. The Arizona Department of Real Estate doesn't move fast. I learned this from Sandra, who had a contact at the DIL through a professional organization. Nothing improper, simply the kind of information that moves through networks of people who have worked in Arizona law long enough to know each other. Brittany's license is flagged for review, Sandra told me. Nothing public yet, but it started. I was standing in my backyard when she told me, looking at the fig tree. 12 years. Not one fig. Still standing. What does that mean for the case? I asked. It means that if this goes to hearing, her professional credibility becomes relevant. And we have Terry's documentation of every expense. The grandparent visitation hearing was set for the second week of January. I spent December quietly. I went to Gloria's for Christmas Eve. I called my sister in Tucson on Christmas morning. I drove past a toy store and bought Kaden a book about space and Lily a kit for pressing flowers, and I left them on Daniel's porch with a card that said only, "I love you both, Grandma Maggie." I don't know if they got them. I didn't ask. What I did do in those quiet weeks was prepare. Sandra needed a documented history of my relationship with the children, not dramatic, not argued, just real. I went through 7 years of photographs on my phone, school pickup records, the pediatric urgent care receipt from Caden's ear infection, a video on my phone of Lily learning to make biscuits, flour on her nose, giggling at nothing. Evidence of ordinary love, the kind that doesn't perform itself because it never thought it needed to. Ruth, my old colleague, came over one afternoon in December and sat at my kitchen table and wrote 4 pages in her neat schoolteacher handwriting, an account of what she'd observed over 7 years. What she'd seen between me and those children, what she'd heard Brittany say in a book club meeting about a grandmother who was mentally unstable and had latched on in an unhealthy way. She signed it, dated it. I drove it to Sandra's office the next morning. Then came Daniel's voicemail. I don't know if Brittany told him to call or if he did it on his own. Either way, I was folding laundry on a Sunday afternoon when my phone lit up with his number, and when I didn't answer, deliberately, because I was learning to be deliberate, he left a message. I listened to it once, standing in my bedroom with a folded towel in my hands. "Mom, look. Brittany says she'll be reasonable about the kids if you drop the court stuff. She's willing to set up a regular schedule. You don't have to make this into a whole legal thing. Just call off your lawyer and she'll be reasonable." "Okay," she said, "she'll be reasonable." He said reasonable 3 times. I set the towel down. He doesn't know he just handed me the case, I thought. A man asking his mother to abandon a legal proceeding in exchange for informal access to her grandchildren, recorded on voicemail, sent unsolicited. Sandra would later describe it, in the understated way she had, as unhelpful to their position. I forwarded it to her that evening. She responded in 4 minutes. "Perfect. Don't delete it." I want you to understand something about where I was in those weeks before the hearing. I was not happy. I was not triumphant. I was something quieter and more complicated than either of those things. I was doing the work, that's all. One document at a time, one conversation at a time, one day at a time. Not because I was certain of winning, because I had decided that whatever happened, Brittany would know I had not simply gone home and dissolved. She had called me not even family in front of 30 people. I was going to let the state of Arizona weigh in on that. The night before the hearing, Sandra called me at 7 p.m. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Ready," I said. "Good." A pause. "Maggie, I've been doing this for 15 years. I want you to know that what you've built here isn't luck. You documented everything. You stayed calm when they made mistakes. You let them move first." Another pause. "Tomorrow is going to go the way it should go." I thanked her and hung up. Then I went to my bathroom, stood in front of the mirror, and put on my pearl earrings. Not because I wanted to look nice for anyone, because I had worn them the night this started, and I wanted to be wearing them when it ended. The hearing was at 8:30 a.m. on a Tuesday in January. Maricopa County Family Court sits on West Jefferson in downtown Phoenix, a building that manages to feel both bureaucratic and deeply serious at the same time. The way places do when real people's real lives get decided inside them every hour. I arrived at 8:05 in my good coat and my pearl earrings and found Sandra already in the hallway, her briefcase open, making a small note on a legal pad with her mechanical pencil. She looked up, looked me over once, gave a single nod that said, "You're ready." Brittany arrived at 8:22 with her attorney, the second one, a man named Greer, who had the careful energy of someone who had recently learned more about his client than he'd originally been told. Daniel walked in behind them. He didn't look at me immediately. When he finally did, in that brief, unavoidable moment before everyone arranged themselves on opposite sides of the hallway, his face did something complicated that I didn't have a name for. He looks tired, I thought. He's been tired for a while, and I just couldn't see it from where I was standing. I looked away first, not from weakness. Because I had not come here for Daniel, I had come here for Caden and Lily, and I needed to stay focused on that. The judge was a woman named the Honorable Patricia Osei, 50s, natural hair, reading glasses on a beaded chain, the particular patience of someone who has heard every version of every family story and is no longer surprised by any of them. She moved through the preliminary matters efficiently. Sandra presented our documentation, 7 years of photographs, school records, the pediatric urgent care receipt, the flower pressing kit receipt from December, the video of Lily making biscuits that the judge watched for its full 40 seconds without expression. Then Ruth's affidavit, 4 pages of neat schoolteacher handwriting outlining 7 years of observed relationship and 1 book club meeting where Brittany had described me as mentally unstable and suggested my attachment to the children was unhealthy. Greer objected. Judge Osei noted the objection and kept reading. Then Sandra played the voicemail. Daniel's voice filled the small courtroom. Brittany says she'll be reasonable about the kids if you drop the court stuff. Just call off your lawyer and she'll be reasonable. The room didn't go dramatically silent. It just settled. The way a room does when something has been said that everyone present will be thinking about for the rest of the day. Judge Osei looked up from her notepad. She looked at Greer, then at Brittany. Brittany was looking at her hands. What happened next is the thing I've replayed most often, in the months since. Not because it was explosive, it wasn't. It was the opposite of explosive. It was quiet in the way that only the most significant things are quiet. Judge Osei asked Brittany directly whether she disputed the documented relationship history between myself and the children. Brittany's attorney started to answer. The judge stopped him with one hand. She wanted to hear from Brittany. And Brittany, who was sharp, who was good under pressure, who had managed 30 people at that birthday party without showing a single seam, made the only mistake left available to her. She leaned slightly forward and said, in a voice that was almost perfectly controlled, "The children have been adjusting to our family structure, Your Honor. Margaret's involvement was never meant to be permanent." Never meant to be permanent. Sandra wrote something on her legal pad and slid it toward me. I looked down. It said, "She just lost." Judge Osei granted interim visitation that afternoon. Every other Sunday, guaranteed, with a review hearing in 90 days to establish a permanent schedule. She also noted, for the record, that the voicemail submitted as Exhibit 4 raised concerns about the use of child access as a negotiating tool, and that this would be taken into account at the review. In the hallway afterward, I heard Brittany say something sharp and quiet to Greer. He responded in the careful tone of a man who is already mentally drafting his invoice and thinking about the exit. Daniel stood apart from both of them, hands in his coat pockets, looking at the floor. I almost went to him. I stopped myself. Not yet, I thought. Not here. The audit findings came in February. I heard about them first from Sandra, who heard from her ADRE contact, who was careful about what she said and how she said it. The formal findings were not yet public. But the pattern that Terry's documentation had outlined, 14 months of personal expenses misclassified as business costs, had been confirmed and expanded. The number was larger than Terry had initially estimated. Brittany's real estate license was suspended pending investigation. Not revoked, suspended. But in a business built entirely on active listings and client trust, suspended might as well have been the end. The brokerage closed its Scottsdale office on a Wednesday. I know this because I drove past it. Not to see it. I had an errand in that direction. And the gold lettering was still on the door, but the lights were off inside. I sat at the light and looked at it for a moment. Then the light changed and I drove on. Daniel called me on a Thursday evening in February. No Brittany in the background, no attorney's careful language in his voice, just him. "Can I come over?" "I'll make dinner," I said. He arrived at 6 looking like someone who hadn't slept well in 2 months, which I suspected was accurate. I made chicken soup, the same soup I'd made during chemo, the one he'd eaten 3 bowls of on his worst nights because sometimes the body remembers comfort, even when the mind is too exhausted to ask for it. I put the documents on the table beside his bowl, the loan paperwork, the promissory note, the audit summary Sandra had shared with me, and Terry's original folder, the post-it tabbed expenses, the Sedona weekend, the home staging consultation charged to a business account. I didn't present them dramatically, I just put them there and let him eat first, because he needed to eat, and because I had learned that the best revelations happen when people aren't on the defensive. He read everything slowly. I sat across from him and drank my tea and waited. When he got to the promissory note, his own handwriting, the chemo handwriting I would recognize anywhere, he stopped. He stared at it for a long time. "I forgot about this," he said. "I know. You never said anything." "No." He looked up. His eyes were red at the edges in the way that had nothing to do with allergies. "She told me you co-signed the loan because you wanted control over us, that it was a power move." I looked at my son across the kitchen table where he'd done homework and eaten cereal and told me about his first heartbreak at 16. "I co-signed it because you asked me to," I said. "Because you're my son. That's the only reason there ever was." He put the promissory note down carefully, the way you put something down when you realize it has weight you didn't previously assign it. We sat in the kitchen for a long time after that, not talking much, the soup getting low in the pot, the refrigerator making its small sounds. Outside, February in Tempe, cool enough to have the windows cracked, the neighborhood quiet on a Thursday night. "I should have called you," he said finally, when she said that at the party. "I should have said something." "Yes," I said. "You should have." I didn't soften it. He didn't ask me to. That was the most honest conversation we'd had in 3 years. It didn't fix everything, but it was the first real brick of something that might, eventually, become solid again. The divorce was Daniel's decision. He told me about it in March, sitting in my backyard in the first real warmth of Phoenix spring, the bougainvillea going orange and pink along the back wall. He said it quietly, like a man reporting something that has already been decided by circumstances rather than chosen. I didn't celebrate. I didn't say I told you so or arrange my face into anything other than what I actually felt, which was a complicated grief on his behalf. "I'm sorry," I said, and I was. Not for what had happened, for what it had cost him to see it. He nodded. Looked at the fig tree. "That thing still hasn't done anything," he said. 12 years, I said. "I keep watering it anyway." He almost smiled. It was the closest thing to his real smile I'd seen in a long time. Brittany relocated to Tucson in April. Her mother's house, I heard through the neighborhood channels that carry such information whether you seek it out or not. The Instagram account went private first, then went quiet entirely. The Scottsdale office space was listed for lease by June. I want to be careful about how I describe what I felt about that. It would be dishonest to say I felt nothing. It would be equally dishonest to say I felt triumphant. What I felt was something closer to the feeling after a very long storm. Not joy, exactly, just the particular relief of standing in a quiet that you'd almost stopped believing would come. I had not destroyed Brittany. Her own choices had done that, and they'd had years of runway before I ever opened my fireproof box at 3 a.m. I had simply stopped absorbing the consequences of those choices on her behalf. That distinction matters to me. The permanent visitation order came through in April, every other Sunday, plus 1 week in summer, plus the right to attend school events with advance notice. The first Sunday Caden and Lily came over, I didn't plan anything special. I bought the ingredients for biscuits. I made sure I had the space book for Caden. I put fresh batteries in the remote because Caden liked to control the TV. Lily walked in, looked around my kitchen like someone confirming a memory, and said, "It smells the same." I had to look out the window for a moment. Then I tied an apron around her waist and handed her the flour, and we made biscuits, and Caden read to us from his space book while we worked, and the afternoon moved the way good afternoons do, slowly, without asking permission, full of small sounds that add up to something that feels like home. Gloria and I went to Sedona in May. 3 days, a rental casita, red rock views from a porch where we drank coffee every morning in the cool high desert air and talked about everything and nothing. One evening we drove out to Cathedral Rock for the sunset and sat on a flat boulder and watched the sky do those things the Arizona sky does that still feel impossible, even after a lifetime of seeing them. "You doing okay?" Gloria asked. "Yeah," I said. "I actually am." She nodded like that was the right answer. I called my sister from the casita that night and talked for an hour. I slept without waking. I drove home Sunday afternoon on I-17 with the windows down and the spring desert smelling of creosote after a rare rain, and I felt, for the first time in longer than I could account for, entirely like myself. My fig tree produced fruit that August. I'm not going to make it into a metaphor because it doesn't need to be one. It's just a fig tree that took 13 years to do what fig trees are supposed to do, for reasons best known to itself, and one morning I walked out into the backyard and there they were, small, imperfect, absolutely real. I ate one standing right there in my backyard in the August heat, still in my pajamas. It was good. I've thought a lot about what I would tell a woman who is where I was, standing in a parking lot at night with a suitcase at her feet, or sitting at a kitchen table at 3 a.m. with documents she'd never read closely enough. What I would want her to know. I don't think I'd give advice, exactly. I'm not qualified to tell anyone else what to do with their pain or their patience, or the specific shape of their particular betrayal. I'd probably just tell her what I told myself, in that long, quiet space between the party and the plan. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You just have to be paying attention. And then maybe I'd offer her coffee, because some things are just that simple. I've thought about this question often, and I genuinely don't know the answer. If Daniel had apologized that night at the party, truly apologized, right there in front of everyone, would any of this have been necessary? Would I have found the strength to let it go? Or does betrayal, once seen clearly, always need to be answered? I'd really like to know what you think.